As night fell on the heart of Paris, no one was safe in the shadow of the Eiffel Tower. The iron framework. Margaret Dubois had been running preservation at the Eiffel Tower for 11 years when she observed the extra ground. It seemed among the second and 0.33 platforms at some stage in her night shift, at precisely 2:17 a.m., materializing from the iron latticework like a ship emerging from fog. She'd been checking structural bolts on the south pillar, on my own besides for the distant lighting fixtures of Paris unfold 300 meters under, while the elevator she wasn't the use of commenced to move. It descended from the 0.33 platform, cables humming, and stopped at a stage that should not exist, midway between flooring, where there has been only open framework and the wind that in no way stopped blowing via the tower's iron bones. The doors opened. Internal, the elevator vehicle became older than any currently in provider. The original 1889 layout, wood paneling and brass furniture long for the reason that replaced. A small plaque study, itage quater in ornate script, floor 4. However, the Eiffel Tower simplest had 3 floors. Margaret's radio crackled. Dubois, U reproduction, got a peculiar reading on the elevator systems. Number 3 displaying hobby but no passenger authorization. She keyed her radio, eyes locked at the not possible elevator. I am investigating, might be a sensor malfunction. Want backup? No longer, but probable simply. The elevator doorways started out to close. Without wondering, Margaret stepped internal. The auto ascended, however now not to any ground Margaret recognized. It rose beyond the 1-3 platform, past the factor in which the tower's iron legs converged right into a single tapering spike, past the remark deck, where travelers paid extra for champagne and vertigo. It rose into a space that architecturally shouldn't exist, into a shape that existed in the tower's geometry, however some way outside its bodily shape. The doors opened onto a platform built of the equal iron latticework, because the relaxation of the tower, however organized in patterns that made Margaret's eyes pain. Angles that have been simultaneously acute and obtuse. Beams that appeared parallel from one perspective and divergent from some other. Rivets that modified variety while she tried to rely them. It became Gustave Eiffel's engineering made impossible, physics expressed in iron that violated the legal guidelines it ought to obey. And at the platform center stood a person in 80s formal dress, palms clasped behind his back, staring out over Paris as if he owned it. While he turned, Margaret recognized him from pictures within the tower's museum, older than within the famous portrait, gaunt in a way that counseled infection or exhaustion, but unmistakably Gustave Eiffel himself. In the end, he stated in antique Parisian French, a person who belongs to the tower, someone it trusts enough to show. I have been ready 135 years for this verbal exchange. You are not, you can't be, Margaret's engineering schooling ward with not possible proof. Eiffel died in 1923. That is a few kind of projection, a hologram. I died, Eiffel agreed. However, I failed to leave, couldn't leave. You recognize, the tower become my magnum opus, my legacy, my protection against the critics who called it an eyesore, a metallic monstrosity, a blight on Paris's splendor. I poured the whole thing into its production, every calculation, each innovation, every ounce of my information and recognition. And when I died, he unfolded his hands, gesturing at the impossible platform. I discovered I'd constructed extra than a monument. I'd constructed a system, and it wished an operator. Margaret sponsored toward the elevator, however the doorways had vanished, leaving most effective cast iron wall. What kind of device? An anchor, a weight. Paris sits atop catacombs containing 6 million bodies. Did you recognize that? 6 million dead, stacked in tunnels underneath the city, their bones arranged in patterns that go beyond mere garage. The Romans constructed on sacred floor. The medieval French constructed atop Roman foundations. And we moderns built atop it all, layers upon layers, the living city resting at the architectured lifeless. Eiffel moved to the platform's aspect, iron framework stretching under them in impossible configurations that harm to examine. Something become waking within the catacombs. I felt it in the course of production, Vibrations via the iron, harmonics that shouldn't exist, resonances that counseled the bones below were arranging themselves, forming structures, growing architecture from skeleton and stone. The tower wasn't only a demonstration of engineering prowess for the 1889 exposition. It became a counterweight. 7,000 heaps of iron driven into earth, anchoring Paris to fact, stopping the metropolis from sliding sideways into whatever area the useless were constructing below it. "It really is insane," Margit said, even though she was considering the vibrations she'd felt now and again all through protection, frequencies that traveled through the tower's shape in patterns that defied acoustic modeling. "The tower is a monument, nothing greater." "Is it? Then why does it hum at night time while no person's looking? Why do preservation employees file seeing more flooring, listening to voices inside the iron, feeling watched by using the framework itself? Why do you check structural bolts you checked the day past and discover them already tightened, rust eliminated, steel polished via hands that depart no fingerprints?" Margit had noticed the ones matters, had said them as pranks by way of other employees, as consequences of wind and temperature on steel, as something besides what they could genuinely be. But status in this impossible floor, dealing with a dead engineer who shouldn't exist, she couldn't maintain the lies anymore. "What's taking place beneath Paris?" she requested. "The lifeless are constructing something. We're for centuries, bone upon bone, creating structures in spaces between spaces. They're no longer aware, not individually. But collective focus emerges from sufficient complexity, and 6 million bodies create a variety of complexity. The catacombs are questioning now, making plans, trying to happen physically within the reciting city." Eiffel grew to become to face her completely, and Margit noticed that his eyes were wrong, not quite human anymore, containing depths that eyes shouldn't have, reflecting light from angles that did not exist. "The tower continues them down. Its weight, yes, but greater than that, its shape. Iron is fact in cloth form. It cannot be altered by perception or creativeness or collective will. The lifeless beneath reshape truth through amassed recognition, but they cannot reshape iron. Can't persuade it to be apart from what it's far. So I constructed a cage of fact, a framework of unalterable fact, and drove it into the earth above their production. So long as the tower stands, Paris remains Paris. The living metropolis stays anchored to the living international. And if it falls, then Paris slides, transforms, will become what the 6 million useless are building, a town of bone and reminiscence, wherein beyond and gift interpenetrate, wherein the dwelling and dead share space, in which reality bends to deal with architecture that should best exist in nightmares. Margit's radio crackled again, however the voice coming via changed into incorrect. Too many voices layered collectively, speak me in French dialects from centuries beyond. "The iron weeps, the framework traces. The load bears down, however, finds much less resistance. The lifeless upward thrust slowly, bone with the aid of bone, building their Paris underneath yours. Soon the towns will merge. Quickly the tower will fail." She dropped the radio. It hit the platform and fell via, tumbling into not possible area between the iron beams, falling forever. "They are getting stronger," Eiffel stated. "I have held them back for over a century, maintained the tower's integrity, reinforced weak points, brought mass where needed. However, I'm eroding. Awareness without flesh isn't always sustainable. I'm dissolving into the tower's shape, becoming natural feature without consciousness. Quickly, I may not be capable of preserve the anchor. And after I fail, whilst the tower's reason is forgotten, and it will become only a traveler enchantment in preference to Paris's salvation, the useless will upward thrust. What do you want from me? To recognize what you are keeping. To recognize that while you tighten the one's bolts, check out the one's beams, update corroded iron, you are not just keeping an ancient monument. You're preserving the lifeless of their graves. You are stopping Paris from becoming what it almost have become during the Revolution, throughout the Commune, at some point of each second when the dying toll grew high sufficient that the catacombs noticed and started out responding." Eiffel gestured, and the platform's ground became obvious. Beneath, via layers of iron and air and stone, Margit noticed the catacombs. but now not as tourists saw them, now not orderly ossuaries and artistic bone arrangements. She noticed them as they virtually have been. Vast, difficult structures of skeleton and could, temples built from femurs and cathedrals comprised of skulls, architecture that existed in too many dimensions, areas that folded through themselves, passageways leading to anywhere and nowhere. And it all turned into growing. Slowly, inexorably, pushing upward through the layers of Paris, seeking the surface, trying to appear in the living city. The tower holds them again, Eiffel repeated. But it desires conscious upkeep. A person who knows its authentic motive. A person who can sense via the iron, understand whilst the useless press too tough towards reality, understand where reinforcement is wanted. Why me? Why not tell the tower's management, the metropolis authorities, the engineers who lay out renovation tasks? Due to the fact they would not agree with, might dismiss this as fantasy or legend. But you've felt it, haven't you? Felt the tower looking you, felt it reply on your upkeep work. You belong to it already, you just haven't admitted it, but. Margaret's idea of the 11 years she'd labored here. How she'd volunteered for nighttime shifts when no one else desired them. How she'd advanced an almost supernatural feel for which bolts wished checking, which beams confirmed stress earlier than checking out discovered it. How she'd started dreaming in iron, her subconscious mapping the tower's structure in best detail, alerting her to problems earlier than they regarded. She wasn't just retaining the tower, she was becoming part of it. What takes place if I refuse? She asked. Not anything right away. You will return to normal work. Forget about this verbal exchange. The tower will make you forget about to shield itself. But in a few years, perhaps a decade, whilst I have eventually eroded past restoration, whilst the anchor fails and Paris transforms, you will don't forget. You'll recognize you can have averted it. And you may spend something remains of your focus. Due to the fact the useless will make you part of their creation, will weave your cognizance into the bone cathedrals they may be building, understanding you deserted your town whilst it wanted you. The platform shuddered. Through the transparent ground, Margaret saw movement inside the catacombs, bones moving, systems growing, pressure building against the barrier the tower maintained. Cracks had been appearing in fact itself, seams where the dead town was seeking to merge with the reciting one. I want to expose you something else, Eiffel said. So you apprehend the stakes absolutely. The platform dissolved, or possibly Margaret's attitude shifted. She couldn't inform which. All at once she stood in Paris, but now not the Paris she knew. This changed into the town the dead have been building, the transformation they sought to impose on the reciting world. The streets were bone. The buildings have been bone. Everything turned into bone, organized in patterns that made architecture from anatomy, developing systems that were one way or the other both stunning and frightening. The lifeless walked here, no longer zombies or shambling corpses, however reminiscence given form, awareness extracted from remains and manifested as translucent figures going about their lives. She noticed medieval merchants selling not anything to no one, progressive soldiers preventing battles already misplaced, plague sufferers dying again and again, their last moments trapped in everlasting loop. 6 million dead reciting their fragments of lifestyles, they all layered atop each different, all visible simultaneously, all looking to exist inside the identical area. This changed into what Paris could come to be if the tower failed. A palimpsest city in which every generation existed immediately, wherein beyond and present merged into incomprehensible complexity, where the living would be swallowed by the lifeless honestly via proximity to so much accumulated memory. My God, Margaret whispered. No gods right here, Eiffel said. Simply results. The useless don't imply damage. They're now not aware enough for intent. However, they're complex enough for action, for building, for manifesting. And in the event that they succeed, if they drag Paris into their construction, 7 million dwelling humans will upload their cognizance to the 6 million already under. And that important mass is probably enough for genuine recognition to emerge. Paris itself becoming conscious, but a cognizance crafted from loss of life and reminiscence rather than lifestyles and increase. The imaginative and prescient ended. Margit discovered herself again at the impossible fourth floor. Eiffel watching her with those two deep eyes. "Will you help?" he requested. "Will you turn out to be what I have been, mum or dad, maintainer, conscious operator of the machine I built?" Margit looked at her arms, difficult from 11 years of gripping iron, scarred from 11 years of cuts and scrapes and burns. She'd given over a decade to this tower, had sacrificed relationships, career advancement, any lifestyles outside its preservation. Human beings notion she was obsessed. Perhaps they have been right. But perhaps obsession was required. Maybe loving the tower enough to preserve it each day became exactly what kept the dead below. "What do I need to do?" she requested. "What you are already doing. Protection, inspection, upkeep. But aware now. Aware of why each bolt subjects, why each beam should be perfect, why the tower can in no way be allowed to weaken. And eventually," Eiffel paused, "eventually you will want to do what I did. Supply yourself to it completely. Merge your consciousness with the iron. Grow to be the tower in place of merely running on it." "You're asking me to die." "I'm asking you to convert, to end up something extra than man or woman life. The tower wishes an operator, and I am failing. In any other year, perhaps less, I'll be gone, dissolved entirely into unconscious function. Without alternative, the anchor will weaken. The lifeless will upward push. Paris will remodel." Margit concept of the city spread under them. The real Paris, the living one, where millions of people slept unaware that their existence balanced on the threshold of transformation. She thought of the catacombs underneath, 6 million dead building their own Paris in areas among spaces. She concept of 11 years maintaining iron, and how she'd felt the tower becoming part of her as a lot as she'd end up part of it. "No longer yet," she stated. "I'll assist. I will hold conscious attention of what the tower surely is, what it is protecting in opposition to. However, I'm no longer geared up to give up my physical existence. Not but." Eiffel nodded slowly. "Comprehensible. I worked for 34 years earlier than I subsequently merged with the shape. But Margit, whilst the time comes, whilst you feel the useless urgent too hard, while you realize the tower wishes more than maintenance, you will have to make the choice. Paris or self, the metropolis or your existence." "I recognize." The elevator reappeared, doors starting. Margit stepped in her, and as the auto descended, the fourth floor diminished, vanishing back into impossible geometry, leaving only normal structure. 3 floors, iron latticework, the arithmetic of Gustave Eiffel made well real. She emerged at the second one platform. Her radio crackled with normal chatter, other protection people, security, the everyday operations of a monument that turned into handiest a monument, serving no reason besides history and tourism and municipal delight. However, Margit knew better now. Felt the tower buzzing below her touch, iron resonating with frequencies that traveled down via foundations into the catacombs, pressing towards the bone systems underneath, keeping the dead in their vicinity. Over the following months, her work changed. Now, not obviously, she nonetheless inspected beams, tightened bolts, replaced corroded elements. But now she felt the tower responding, guiding her to regions that needed interest before exams revealed problems. She advanced an intuitive sense for wherein the lifeless have been pressing toughest, in which truth confirmed stress, where extra reinforcement become wanted. And she or he started out to observe others. Preservation people who'd been at the tower for many years, who showed the same obsessive attention to detail, who labored nighttime shifts with the aid of preference and seemed to talk with the structure itself. They by no means spoke of it explicitly. However, Margit diagnosed the signs and symptoms. The way they touched iron reverently, the way they listened to vibrations others couldn't listen, the manner they prioritized certain maintenance over others without respectable justification. They have been guardians too. Perhaps they didn't recognize approximately Eiffel or the fourth ground or the bone metropolis beneath. However, they felt the tower's significance, sense that keeping it mattered more than maintaining any normal shape. 2 years after meeting Eiffel, Margit commenced experiencing blackouts. She'd begin a shift on the primary platform and awaken hours later on the 0.33, her tool belt full of finished paintings she did not recollect doing. bolts tightened with best torque, beams inspected with superhuman thoroughness, upkeep performed by means of arms that moved with more than human precision. The tower became working via her, using her body when her consciousness couldn't preserve tempo with what needed doing. She became merging with it steadily, consciousness bleeding throughout the boundary among flesh and iron. "It's accelerating," Eiffel told her in the course of one in all her increasingly frequent visits to the fourth ground. He became greater translucent now, his shape flickering, barely retaining Concord. "The lifeless are building faster. Something within the cutting-edge world feeds them. Maybe cell indicators, perhaps Wi-Fi, maybe the electromagnetic soup we've got created. They may be using it to bolster their systems, to push more difficult in opposition to the boundary. How long can we have?" "Months, maybe much less. I'm nearly long gone, and when I absolutely dissolve, the tower will want a brand new operator without delay. It can characteristic autonomously for a brief time, however no longer long. Without conscious steering, it's just metal. The lifeless will overwhelm it." Margit looked at her hands. The pores and skin was taking up a metallic sheen, veins darkening like oxidized iron. The transformation changed into beginning whether or not she consented or now not. "Will it hurt?" she asked. "No, you may actually spread. Your cognizance will increase from flesh into iron, from character attention into the tower's collective function. You'll experience the whole thing, each rivet, every beam, every square centimeter of surface. You'll be tremendous and centered simultaneously. And you may recognize, eventually, why the tower must stand. Why its protection topics greater than any person lifestyles." The platform shuddered. Beneath, seen through the transparent floor, the bone town surged upward. Skulls pressing in opposition to truth's underside, attempting to interrupt through, seeking to merge with the reciting Paris above. "It is time," Eiffel stated. "I cannot preserve them plenty longer. You need to determine. Remodel now, take your region as operator, preserve Paris anchored, or refuse and watch the city fall within weeks." Margit thought of her condominium inside the 15th arrondissement. Small, not often occupied. Containing nothing that honestly mattered. She notion of buddies she'd misplaced contact with years ago, own family who'd stopped calling whilst she'd stopped answering. She notion of 11 years, no, 13 now, spent loving an iron tower more than something human. She'd already made the selection, simply. Had made it the first time she'd volunteered for night shift, the primary time she'd felt the tower respond to her contact, the first time she'd understood that some structures needed greater than protection. They needed devotion. "How do I begin?" she requested. Eiffel smiled, his shape brightening in short earlier than fatting. "You have already got. You simply want to let cross. Forestall clinging to flesh. Permit your cognizance do what it's been looking to do for years. Expand into the iron, merge with the shape, become the tower." Margit placed each palms on the platform's railing. The iron became warm, pulsing like dwelling flesh, welcoming her. She felt her focus starting to spread, attention flowing out of her skull into the metallic, perception increasing to embody the entire structure. She felt each rivet simultaneously. Felt travelers on the first platform, their weight dispensed across the ground. Felt wind at 300 meters, pushing towards the higher structure. Felt foundations driven into earth, pressing down at the catacombs, keeping lower back the surge of bone and memory. And she felt Eiffel liberating his grip, his cognizance in the end dissolving after 135 years of carrier, his final notion transmitted immediately to her cognizance. "Thank you. Shield the city. Keep Paris actual." Then he was long gone, and Margit changed into alone in the vastness of iron, her man or woman identity fading, replaced with the aid of something larger, something that concept in phrases of stress and pressure, load and counterweight, the eternal arithmetic of preserving the dead under and the living above. Her body stood at the fourth ground for 3 greater days earlier than subsequently crumbling to rust. By using then, Margit now not needed it. She was the tower, all 7,000 tons, every beam and bolt and rivet. She became the anchor holding Paris to fact, the load keeping bone architecture from manifesting in the dwelling city. And she could remain. For many years, for hundreds of years, for so long as iron ought to stand towards the amassed stress of 6 million lifeless. She might preserve herself, manual workers to regions needing repair, ensure the tower stood perfect and functional. Under the bone town pressed upward, seeking the surface, in search of merger. Above, the reciting Paris went approximately its business, unaware. And between them, in the iron framework of Gustave Eiffel's greatest advent, Margit Dubois saved her eternal vigil. The tower stood. Paris remained Paris. The useless stayed dead. And Margit, significant and targeted, person and collective, human attention spread across lots of tons of structured iron, watched over the metropolis that might by no means realize it owed its lifestyles to a renovation employee who'd cherished a tower extra than lifestyles itself. Forever. The visitors who in no way left. Jean-Paul Mercier have been running elevator variety on the Eiffel Tower for 18 years, whilst he observed the passengers who wouldn't get off. They rode to the top, descended to the lowest, then rode up again, faces pressed against the windows, expressions frozen between marvel and something else, something that made Jean-Paul's skin crawl whilst he regarded too carefully. In the beginning, he idea they have been just travelers who'd paid for more than one trips, although that wasn't how tickets labored. But these passengers by no means spoke, never checked their telephones, never took images. They just rode, ad infinitum, their clothes a long time out of fashion, their eyes monitoring the movement of the town beneath with unsettling recognition. "Do you spot them?" he asked Claire, who operated elevator-wide Variety 3. They had been having coffee at some stage in the mid-afternoon break, watching travelers' circulation across the Champ de Mars. "See who?" "The repeat passengers. Garments. They by no means exit, simply experience up and down, sometimes for hours." Claire frowned. Jean-Paul, no person can journey for hours. The elevators stop at every platform. Protection tests tickets. If a person tried to stay on without authorization, that they had be eliminated immediately. That is what I idea too. However, I have seen the identical woman, black dress, pearls, coiffure from maybe the 1920s, experience my elevator 6 instances nowadays. She in no way suggests a ticket, never interacts with different passengers, just stands within the corner observing Paris like she's seeking to memorize it. "You are tired, operating too many shifts." Claire touched his arm gently. "Perhaps take some days off. My cousin can cowl for you." But Jean-Paul knew he wasn't tired. He became seeing something others did not, or could not, or had skilled themselves to ignore. And that night, operating the nighttime shift because the tower's lighting fixtures illuminated the Paris sky, he decided to research. At 11:47 p.m., simply earlier than the very last descent, the girl inside the black get dressed entered his elevator by myself. Jean-Paul permit the doors close, then stopped the auto among structures, enticing the emergency brake. "Who are you?" he asked. "Why do you maintain using?" The female became slowly. Up close, Jean-Paul noticed that her pores and skin had an atypical translucency, like wax paper, and her eyes didn't quite awareness efficaciously. When she spoke, her voice got here from someplace aside from her mouth, echoing through the elevator car as if transmitted through the metal itself. "I died right here. June 4th, 1948, jumped from the second one platform. They are saying it was suicide, however it wasn't. I slipped, misplaced my stability taking a photo, fell 70 meters. The impact killed me immediately." She paused, or it must have. Jean-Paul's hand moved in the direction of the emergency name button, but froze while the female gestured. The elevator car groaned, tilting barely, and he realized she ought to affect the machinery, could manage it in ways he couldn't. "In place of loss of life, I fell into the tower. Not onto it, into the spaces among the iron framework, into the geometry that exists inside the structure but outside ordinary area. And I found I wasn't by myself." The elevator's lights flickered. In the strobing illumination, Jean-Paul saw others, dozens of translucent figures crowding the auto that have been empty moments earlier then. Guys in military uniforms from various eras. Ladies in the entirety from Victorian crinolines to 70s pantsuits. Youngsters protecting toys that hadn't been manufactured in decades. They all with that same expression, marvel blended with something else. Hunger, Jean-Paul realized. They had been hungry for something. "We are those who by no means left," the lady persisted. "Those who died right here, or near here, or every so often simply loved it so much that once we died someplace else, our awareness gravitated to this area. The tower collects us, has been amassing us because it turned into built. 136 years of deaths, injuries, suicides, and obsessions. Every person trapped within the iron framework, driving elevators that exist in areas adjacent to those you operate, on foot platforms no travelers ever see." "Why are you telling me this?" Jean-Paul whispered. "Due to the fact you may see us now. That means you are becoming like us. The tower is claiming you. In a few months, maybe 12 months, you will have a coincidence. Or your coronary heart will absolutely stop whilst you are working this elevator. And then you'll be a part of us, using forever, looking Paris however in no way touching it, aware however not alive." "That's insane." "Is it? How many years have you worked right here?" 18. "It's longer than most elevator operators live. Most of the people locate the work monotonous, the hours tough, the pudding claustrophobic despite the open perspectives. But you like it, don't you? Love the tower, love the rhythm of ascent and descent, love watching the town from these home windows. You're already too merged with this region. We're just displaying you what comes next." The lighting fixtures stabilized. The other figures diminished, leaving only the lady in black. Jean-Paul released the emergency brake, permit the elevator complete its descent. When the doors opened at floor stage, the girl didn't exit. She honestly smiled regrettably and stated, "See you soon, Jean-Paul. We always acquire those who love this area an excessive amount of." Then she was long gone, and Jean-Paul stood by myself in his elevator vehicle, shaking, thinking the entirety he knew about the tower he'd served for nearly 2 decades. He must have stopped, need to have walked away, determined one-of-a-kind work, broken the relationship before it turned into too past due. But he could not. The girl were right. He cherished the tower. Loved it extra than he'd cherished any man or woman, any vicinity, any element in his whole lifestyles. The thought of never running an elevator right here again, never watching Paris from those home windows, never feeling the structure vibrate beneath his feet as lots of sight visitors moved via it day by day, that become worse than demise. So he kept operating, saved seeing the ghost passengers, commenced to recognize people, found out their styles. The soldier who usually rode to the first platform at sunrise. The couple who stood collectively at the second platform windows at sundown. The child who chased invisible friends throughout the empty third platform at nighttime. They had been usually there, occupying spaces parallel to the dwelling visitors, experiencing the tower in dimensions travelers couldn't understand. And slowly, Jean-Paul started to engage with them. "Where do you move while you're now not driving?" he requested the girl in black one night. "Into the framework. The tower is greater interior than out of doors, now not bodily, however conceptually. There are areas inside the iron latticework, gaps in truth in which the structure's geometry creates pockets of existence. We live there, or exist there. We do not want meals or sleep or anything physical. Simply the tower itself, simply the endless riding and looking and ready." Anticipating what? She checked out him with those slightly unfocused eyes. "We are not certain anymore. Before everything, we waited for release, for whatever comes after death. But that by no means got here. Then we waited for a person to renown us, to see us, to apprehend that we are nevertheless here. You're the first in decades who has been able to understand us in reality. Maybe we had been expecting you. What do you need from me? Help us ride properly. We will simplest access the ghost elevators, the ones that exist adjacent to yours. But we keep in mind the real ones. Keep in mind status beside living humans, feeling the solar through the windows, sensing the vibration of the equipment. We want to experience that again, even in short. And you can let us. You may open the doors among your space and ours." "How?" "By means of choosing to. through acknowledging our life, by loving the tower sufficient to take into account that it is extra than iron and engineering. It is a collector of focus, a trap for souls who cannot let pass. Adore it that a good deal, Jean-Paul, and the limitations dissolve. Your elevator turns into ours, your passengers grow to be ours, and we are able to journey together. Jean-Paul knew he ought to refuse. Must maintain the limits between dwelling and useless, need to maintain the ghost passengers of their parallel space, ought to prevent whatever merger they have been suggesting. But God assist him, he changed into curious. And greater than that, he changed into lonely. 18 years of operating an elevator, making small communicate with vacationers who forgot him the instant they exited, going domestic to an empty apartment every night time. He'd alternate that for any type of true connection, in spite of the dead. "Display me," he said. The lady smiled. She stepped closer, and Jean-Paul felt cold radiating from her, now not the cold of temperature, but the cold of absence, of area wherein warm temperature must be however wasn't. She positioned a translucent surrender his coronary heart. "You recognize how? You just want to forestall resisting. Stop keeping the barrier between what is and what changed into. Let the tower display you its full self." The elevator car shuddered. Now not automatically, this became deeper, truth itself trembling. And Jean-Paul saw it, the ghost elevator overlapping along with his very own, the equal vehicle present in states concurrently. The woman in black stood beside him, still translucent however greater present now. And through the windows, he noticed Paris as she noticed it. Now not just the modern-day city however all of it, every generation stacked atop each other, visible simultaneously. The Paris of 1889, whilst the tower changed into new, controversial, not but liked. The Paris of the arena wars, darkened and occupied, the tower's lighting extinguished. The Paris of the Belle Epoque, glittering with optimism. The Paris of revolutions and renovations and differences, all gift immediately, layered like transparencies. "This is what we see," the female said. "That is how the tower experiences time, not linearly but as accumulation. Every second it truly is came about here exists simultaneously. Every traveler who's ever ridden those elevators is driving nonetheless, in spaces adjacent to this one. The tower collects stories like it collects us, and you can see them now, can access them." Jean-Paul looked at his arms. They have been turning into translucent like hers, his solid flesh fatting into something greater like her wax paper skin. The merger turned into starting. He changed into loss of life, now not physically, but spiritually, conceptually, his life bleeding into the tower's gathered consciousness. "No," he said, pulling lower back. "I'm not ready, I do not want this." Then forestall seeing us, prevent acknowledging our lifestyles, move back to the simple international in which elevators are simply elevators and passengers are handiest dwelling. The woman's voice held no judgment, simplest unhappy understanding. "But you cannot, can you? Once you've seen the entire tower, you can't unsee it. As soon as you've got perceived how plenty existence it carries, you cannot go back to the limited model you knew earlier then." She became right. Jean-Paul tried to recognition at the contemporary Paris out of doors, the home windows, tried to see handiest the prevailing moment, but the other eras kept bleeding through. The town turned into too layered now, too complex, life too multidimensional. He completed his shift in a daze, the ghost passengers riding alongside residing vacationers who sensed not anything incorrect. Whilst he in the end clocked out at 2 a.m., his manager stopped him. "Jean-Paul, you look horrible. Are you unwell?" He desired to mention sure, desired to say illness, go home, never go back, but his mouth stated, just worn out, "I will be best day after today." The following day got here, and he wasn't great. The translucence became spreading, his body turning into progressively less solid, much less present. He ought to still engage with physical items, perform the elevator controls, speak to passengers. However, he became fatting, turning into greater like the ghosts he'd been seeing. Claire noticed. "Jean-Paul, your hand, I can see via it. What's going on to you?" He looked down. She changed into proper. Held towards the mild, his hand becomes semi-transparent, bones visible like an X-ray. "I don't know, I suppose the tower is soaking up me. turning me into considered one of them. One and all who? Those who by no means left. The dead passengers who preserve using. I have been seeing them for weeks, and now I'm becoming like them. Claire grabbed his arm, her hand surpassed in part through his flesh as if he turned into product of fog. We want to get you to a clinic, or I do not know what. This isn't clinical. This is something else. It is too late. Jean-Paul felt it with certainty. The tower has marked me. I am certainly one of its accrued souls now. I'll keep operating right here, preserve operating this elevator until my frame subsequently offers out. And then I'll keep working besides, simply in an exceptional space with one-of-a-kind passengers. The ghost elevator, for all time. There has to be a way to stop it, to reverse it. Handiest one way, forestall loving it, forestall caring about this vicinity. Stroll away and by no means come lower back. Jean-Paul checked out the tower hovering above them, iron framework towards the morning sky, stunning and terrible. But I cannot. Even knowing what it's doing to me, I can't go away. Does that make me insane? It makes you trapped, Claire said quietly. And I suppose I'm too. I have been running right here 12 years. I have visible things too, strange passengers, strange movements in the framework. I simply never let myself acknowledge them. But now that you've said it out loud, now that I'm searching nicely, I can see them. The ghosts, they're everywhere. She pointed. Jean-Paul observed her gaze and noticed dozens of translucent figures crowding the structures, driving the elevators, standing on the railings looking out over Paris. Some had been current, their clothes modern day, their appearances fresh. Others have been old, their forms diminished from many years of lifestyles as ghosts, their capabilities barely distinguishable. How many do you observe there are? Claire whispered. Masses, perhaps hundreds. Each demise, every obsession, each soul that enjoyed this area too much to depart. Jean-Paul watched a toddler from possibly the 1950s run laughing across the Champ de Mars, chasing a ring that rolled in circles without ever rolling away. We are not the first operators to word. Appearance there. He pointed to an elevator operator in vintage uniform, 30s or 40s, status beside elevator number 1. The man, become absolutely translucent, had without a doubt been dead for decades. However, he still went through the motions of working his elevator, calling out flooring in French too, for modern-day travelers to understand. They maintain running even after dying, Claire said, horror dawning. The tower doesn't simply acquire us, it makes use of us. We emerge as part of its operation, part of its feature. Everlasting workers servicing eternal traffic in a monument that in no way definitely closes. Jean-Paul felt the fact of this settling into his bones, bones that had been turning into increasingly seen as his flesh continued to fade. We need to recognize what the tower genuinely is, why it collects souls, what it is doing with all this amassed cognizance. Over the following days, they investigated, searched tower information, interviewed longtime employees, researched ancient information. What they discovered became disturbing. The Eiffel Tower became built for the 1889 Exposition Universelle, the world's honest celebrating the French Revolution's centenary. But the place wasn't random. The Champ de Mars had been used for executions all through the Revolution. Lots had died there, their blood soaking into earth that might sooner or later guide the tower's foundations. It is constructed on dying, Claire stated, studying from a historic textual content. Actually, the principles go down meters into soil saturated with the blood of revolution victims, and before that, it changed into a Navy workout ground. Squatties educated there for centuries. What number have died in training injuries? What number had been performed there for desertion or cowardice? So the loss of life became already gift, Jean-Paul stated slowly. The tower did not create it, it focused it, gave it structure, grew to become scattered death into organized collection. They discovered records of strange incidents in the course of the tower's history. Workers' demise at some stage in creation in methods that seemed nearly intentional, as if the shape desired their deaths. Site visitors who jumped or fallen but whose bodies had been never observed, as though they had fallen into the tower in place of onto the ground. Operators and renovation workers who definitely vanished, closing visible at their posts, in no way performing again. "It has been collecting souls seeing that before it became completed," Claire stated. "The building method itself claimed lives, incorporated them into the structure, and it's been feeding ever given that. Each loss of life close to it, every obsession with it, all people who loved it an excessive amount of, all of them turn out to be a part of the collection." But why? What does a tower need with accrued attention? They were given their solution on Jean-Paul's final nighttime as a reciting individual. He knew it become his closing nighttime because his body had grown to be nearly absolutely translucent, his coronary heart seen beating in his chest, his organs mentioned like an anatomy diagram. He'd stopped going home, virtually stayed on the tower across the clock, operating while scheduled and driving the ghost elevators whilst no longer, completely a part of both worlds now. At nighttime, status at the 0.33 platform with Claire, and surrounded by using dozens of ghost site visitors, he felt the tower's attention attain out to him. Now not the woman in black, this became deeper, older, the structure itself turning into conscious and communicative. Photos flooded his mind. The tower not as iron and engineering, however, as antenna, as collector, as tool designed to gather and transmit. The iron framework was an internet catching focus. The elevators have been shipping systems moving souls through specific dimensions of lifestyles. The structures were processing stations wherein death was prepared and classified. And it broadcast, used the collected cognizance as sign, as message, as beacon calling outward into area, into time, into realms that existed adjacent to everyday truth. The tower changed into communication tool built by means of Gustave Eiffel, now not just to illustrate French engineering prowess, however, to touch something. Entities that existed past human notion, that had to be reached through unconventional approach, through architecture that amassed souls and used them as medium for transmission. "My God," Jean-Paul breathed, "it is not a monument, it is a transmitter, and we're the transmission." Claire grabbed his arm, her hand handed through him now, both of them too translucent to preserve strong contact. Transmitting to what? To something exists within the areas between areas. Something dwells in dimensions we can't generally understand. Eiffel wasn't just an engineer, he turned into something else. Someone who understood that focus might be structure, that souls may be signal, that dying will be records. The ghost passengers round them had been agitated now, their bureaucracy flickering, responding to this revelation. They'd sensed the reality without information it. They were trapped no longer simply by using the tower, but by its purpose. They were being used. "Are we able to prevent it?" Claire requested. "Can we close down the transmission?" "Best by destroying the tower. And even then," Jean-Paul checked out the iron framework stretching above and below them. At the lots of tons of metal that had stood for over a century, had grown to be synonymous with Paris itself. "Even then, I suppose we would remain. The accumulated souls are part of the shape now. Destroying it would simply loose us unexpectedly, release us into Paris, turn the whole metropolis into haunted ground. So we're trapped, and we're serving a few reasons we don't understand, transmitting to matters we can't see, getting used as sign for entities that should not exist." "Yes," Jean-Paul felt his heart sluggish, his respiratory grow to be optionally available, his life sliding completely into the ghost realm. This changed into it, the very last transition. In moments, he'd be completely dead, completely a part of the gathering. But Claire, maybe that is no longer absolutely terrible. Perhaps getting used for cosmic conversation is better than simply ceasing to exist. Perhaps being a part of the transmission means we remember that we are serving some considerable purpose, even though we do not recognize it. This is insane. Perhaps, however, examine Paris. Observe the metropolis spread beneath us. Is not it lovely? Does not it deserve a monument that reaches past ordinary reality? A shape that communicates with geographical regions human beings can't get entry to? We're a part of that now. We are the message being dispatched. And somewhere something is receiving us, hearing us, knowing that we existed. His coronary heart stopped. Jean-Paul felt it stop, felt his frame entire its transformation into natural ghost, felt his focus absolutely merge with the tower's gathered mass of souls. He changed into useless, and he became more alive than ever, aware about every different ghost, each accumulated focus, every soul the tower had claimed throughout 136 years. They were significant, hundreds of them, all connected, all part of the transmission. And as Jean-Paul joined their numbers, he felt it, the response. Some things sizable and incomprehensible receiving their sign, acknowledging their life, sending returned something that might have been gratitude or reputation or honestly acknowledgement that the message had been obtained. The tower became running. Its purpose turned into fulfilled. And Jean-Paul changed into part of that cause now, for all time using elevators that existed in spaces among areas, watching Paris from platforms no reciting character may want to reach, serving as signal in a transmission that reached past fact itself. He noticed Claire beside him, her reciting body fatting, her transformation beginning. She'd be useless inside weeks, becoming a member of the gathering, becoming part of the great recognition that the tower had assembled across extra than a century. "Welcome," he told her, his voice no longer coming from a mouth but transmitted directly through the iron framework, heard by way of each ghost concurrently. "Welcome to the gathering. Welcome to the transmission. Welcome to the cause we didn't know we were serving." The tower stood against the Paris night time, lights blazing, travelers riding elevators without knowing they shared space with heaps of dead. The dwelling and dead separated by means of barriers as thin as acknowledgement, as fragile as notion. And Jean-Paul rode the ghost elevators all the time, looking Paris through home windows that showed every technology simultaneously, serving as a part of a signal reaching beyond area and time, trapped and purposeful, lifeless and more alive than ever, amassed by using architecture that became more than metallic, more than engineering, greater than monument. The Eiffel Tower stood. The transmission continued. The dead rode forever, gladly, their recognition woven into iron framework that served purposes beyond human comprehension. And someplace, something big acquired their signal and turned into pleased. The tower's reminiscence. Dr. Sophie Laurent was inspecting rust patterns on the Eiffel Tower's south pillar when she realized the corrosion became spelling phrases. Now not in French or any present-day language, however in the identical iron oxide script that had regarded on the north pillar 3 weeks in advance, before that phase turned into swiftly replaced by means of the upkeep authority, with no clarification given to the healing group. "Emile, look at this," she known as to her assistant, photographing the rust formation earlier than it may be sanded away. The words, if they were words, seemed to shift when considered from different angles, the ferric oxide debris rearranging themselves like iron filings responding to a magnet. Emile approached, squinting on the weathered metallic. "It is simply random oxidation styles, Sophie. We are seeing what we need to peer. Pareidolia. Then explain why it's taking place in the identical region on every pillar. Equal height, identical distribution pattern, identical apparent shape." Sophie pulled up her tablet, displaying photos from the alternative 3 pillars. "This is not random. Something is writing in rust. It's not possible. So become powered flight before 1903, so turned into splitting the atom. Impossible just way we don't understand the mechanism yet." Sophie ran her hand throughout the corroded surface and felt it, a vibration below her fingertips, a rhythm that wasn't pretty mechanical. The tower become doing something, had been doing something for longer than all of us had observed. That night time, Sophie stayed overdue with permission from the authorities' nighttime supervisor, who owed her a favor from her work at the 2019 preservation undertaking. She set up monitoring system around the south pillar, cameras with time-lapse capability, electromagnetic subject detectors, even an easy seismograph to measure vibrations inside the metal shape. At 2:47 a.m., everything activated right away. The rust commenced transferring. Now not swiftly, however unmistakably, debris shifting across the iron surface like a sluggish movement sandstorm. Sophie watched through the digital camera feed as the styles fashioned, reformed, created structures that regarded deliberately communicative. and her EMF detector screamed, picking up electromagnetic hobby that had no commercial enterprise coming from a 19th century iron tower. She grabbed her phone, texted Emile, "Get right here now, you have to see this." By the time he arrived 30 minutes later, the rust had fashioned something that couldn't be dismissed as random. It was a date, 31 Mars 1889, and beneath it a name, Gustave Eiffel. "It truly is the day the tower become completed," Emile breathed. "The respectable establishing date. But why might rust shape that date? How would rust shape that date?" Sophie become already checking her different gadgets. The electromagnetic readings are off the size. The tower is generating its very own subject, and it is pulsing, not random fluctuations, however structured intervals. Like Morse code, but more complicated. "You're suggesting the tower is communicating." "I am suggesting something is using the tower to speak. Whether or not that is the shape itself or something inside it, I don't know yet." Sophie started photographing systematically, documenting the entirety. "But this isn't random corrosion, Emile. That is planned, intentional. A person or something is writing messages in iron oxide." Over the subsequent weeks, they documented the phenomenon. The rust styles seemed nightly at precisely 2:47 a.m., usually on a unique phase of the tower, constantly forming dates and names. They all related to the tower's records, construction workers who'd died all through building, engineers who'd contributed to the layout, even vacationers who'd visited inside the early years and written their impressions. "It's like the tower is remembering," Sophie stated, organizing the dates into chronological order, gambling back its own history in rust. "Systems don't recollect. They're no longer aware." "Aren't they? Quantum mechanics shows awareness might be an essential property of matter, now not emergent from biological complexity. What if iron may be conscious given the right situations? What if 7,000 tons of wrought iron, prepared into precise geometric patterns, subjected to over a century of human interest and interplay, evolved some form of attention?" Emile looked at her skeptically. "This is not science, Sophie. That is mysticism." "Then provide an explanation for the phenomenon scientifically. Provide an explanation for how rust arranges itself into traditionally correct dates and names. Explain the electromagnetic pulses that arise concurrently. Provide an explanation for why it always takes place at 2:47 a.m., the precise time the tower's production was declared whole." He could not. Nobody should. Sophie submitted her findings to the Recuperation Authority, expecting skepticism but hoping for support to maintain research. As a substitute, she acquired an assembly notice marked "pressing and exclusive." The assembly occurred in a basement workplace of the Société d'Exploitation de la Excursion Eiffel headquarters, with 3 human beings Sophie did not recognize. They added themselves really as historical past consultants. However, something approximately, their bearing advised military or intelligence background. "Dr. Laurent," the female in rate started out, "your discovery is each tremendous and elaborate. What you've got documented isn't new. We have recognized approximately the tower's interest for decades. What is new is that a person outdoor our organization has noticed." "Your organization?" Sophie asked. "We are accountable for handling statistics approximately the tower that might disturb public self-assurance. The rust messages are one such phenomenon. There are others." The lady positioned a record at the desk among them. "Earlier than we talk similarly, you need to recognize what you have determined. This file includes reviews dating back to 1923, the year after Gustave Eiffel's loss of life. It's when it commenced." Sophie opened the record with trembling fingers. The first file was a memo from the tower's upkeep branch, reporting rust formations that appeared to expose Eiffel's signature. It became disregarded as accident. Then it befell again, and once more, always at 2:47 a.m., usually showing dates and names from the tower's records. "They notion it was vandalism at first," the female persisted. "Some tricky prank. However, nobody was ever caught, and the safety measures made such pranks increasingly not possible. With the aid of the 1950s, the consensus changed into that the tower itself changed into responsible. But that conclusion was unacceptable for public intake. "Why?" Sophie requested, though she understood. Admitting a first-rate landmark became probably aware would cause panic, might enhance uncomfortable questions on different structures, would undermine the knowledge that humanity managed its constructed environment. Due to the fact human beings want to consider that buildings are just buildings, that monuments are stone and metallic, not anything extra. The moment we renown that structure might be conscious, would possibly have intentions, might be more than passive cloth, society becomes volatile. People could question every structure they inhabit. The lady leaned forward. "However you're proper about one element, the tower is remembering, and it is trying to tell us something." "What?" "We don't know. It is why we're recruiting you." The messages were escalating. Was once simply dates and names. Now we are getting longer formations, sentences, paragraphs, complete narratives written in Rust. And they're all approximately the identical thing, what the tower witnessed in the course of global warfare II. The woman pulled out recent images showing Rust formations far greater complicated than what Sophie had documented. They confirmed addresses in Paris, dates from the German career, names of folks that been arrested, deported, killed. The tower changed into remembering the darkest period of Paris's present-day history, and it was doing so with meticulous, demanding detail. "We think it is building to something," the lady stated. "The messages are getting extra urgent, greater frequent. What began as nightly occurrences is now taking place each few hours, and the electromagnetic activity is increasing. We're worried that regardless of the tower is attempting to talk, we're running out of time to understand it." Time before what? Earlier than the tower does something more dramatic than writing in Rust. Sophie joined the institution, officially a unique recuperation representative, however definitely a part of a team tracking the tower's anomalous conduct. She found out that the Rust messages had been simply the most visible symptom. There were others. Travelers on occasion mentioned listening to voices within the iron framework, speak me in German and French, conversations from the profession years. Protection cameras once in a while captured shadows that moved independently of any light source, shapes that regarded to be human beings from different eras crossing the systems. And structural sensors detected vibrations that had no mechanical rationalization, rhythms that suggested the tower changed into breathing or questioning, or both. "What passed off in the course of the occupation?" Sophie requested Marcel, the group's historian. "What did the tower witness that it is so desperate to don't forget?" "Everything. The tower have become a symbol of resistance. Hitler visited in 1940, climbed to the top as a propaganda gesture. However, the French sabotaged the elevators, forcing him to use stairs. The resistance used the tower's iron shape to hide messages, materials, even human beings. And the Germans," Marcel's expression darkened. "The Germans used the Champ de Mars for executions. Resistance fighters, Jews, each person they deemed enemies. The tower watched all of it." Sophie spent weeks studying the Rust messages, referencing them with historic statistics. Each date matched a real event. Each name belonged to a real character. The tower wasn't simply remembering, it became bearing witness, retaining testimony of atrocities that some had attempted to neglect. But the messages were fragmentary, incomplete. It turned into like the tower turned into suffering to articulate something, preventing against obstacles of using Rust as language. Sophie found out they had to help it speak greater truly. "What if we provided higher medium?" she cautioned at a crew meeting. "The Rust is crude, gradual to form, short to climb it away. But if we gave the tower get right of entry to digital structures, to digital interfaces?" "Virtually no longer," the group chief stated. "We incorporate the phenomenon, Dr. Laurent. We don't expand it. Connecting a potentially conscious shape to the internet could be catastrophic. Or it might allow the tower subsequently say what it has been looking to talk for many years. Whatever it witnessed during the battle, anything it's remembered, do not we have an obligation to pay attention it?" The group turned into divided. Half of agreed with containment approach. One too agreed with Sophie that the tower deserved to be heard. The impasse changed into damaged when the Rust messages stopped being diffused. On the morning of June 14th, the anniversary of Paris's fall to Nazi occupation, Each iron surface on the tower changed into included in rust. Not patterns or words, but stable orange-crimson corrosion, as if the shape had elderly a century in a single day. Preservation crews rushed to assess harm, looking ahead to catastrophic weakening of the steel. But the rust wasn't everyday. It became hard, almost ceramic in texture, and when analyzed confirmed a crystalline structure not possible for herbal iron oxide. Extra than that, the rust became heat, generating warmness from no identifiable source, making the complete tower radiate like a big area heater. "It's irritated," Sophie said, inspecting samples within the lab. "Or pissed off. It's been seeking to speak for decades, and we've been brushing off it, overlaying up the proof, treating it like a trouble to be controlled in preference to a voice to be heard." "Structures do not get indignant," Marcel protested, although his voice lacked conviction. "Do not they? Buildings develop unwell building syndrome. Bridges can resonate to destruction. Structure responds to how it is used and maintained. Why shouldn't a structure it's been aware for a century broaden emotional responses?" The crew made a decision. They might provide the tower with better approach of conversation. Sophie designed an interface, electrodes connected to the iron framework, linked to computer systems programmed to interpret electromagnetic fluctuations as linguistic patterns. It became unprecedented, potentially dangerous, but essential. They set up the system after nighttime, running quick to avoid media attention. The moment the relationship turned into established, the tower answered. Textual content flooded the computer displays. No longer rust messages, but direct virtual conversation. The tower the usage of its electromagnetic field to control the computer systems, writing with determined speed. It was testimony, witness statements. The tower became doing what it were constructed to do in 1889, display human achievement. However, now it changed into demonstrating human ability for both heroism and horror. It confirmed names: Jean Moulin, Henry Krasucky, dozens of resistance opponents who'd hidden messages in the tower's framework. It confirmed locations, addresses of safe homes, execution websites. Gestapo headquarters. It showed dates. Each deportation, each arrest, each execution it had witnessed from its position overlooking Paris. And it confirmed something else, what it had executed in the course of the one's darkish years. The tower hadn't been passive. It had interfered, used its electromagnetic area to disrupt German radio communications, used its iron shape to guard resistance radio transmitters, used its very presence as symbol to encourage desire, to remind Parisians that French achievements persevered even under career. "My God," Marcel breathed, reading the testimony. The tower was combating back. All those tales about radio interference across the tower at some point of the battle, we thought it was simply the metallic framework. It was the tower itself, consciously jamming German communications. However, the testimony persisted, developing darker. The tower had witnessed the executions on the Champ de Mars, had absorbed the deaths of hundreds of human beings murdered in its shadow. And people deaths had modified it, had transformed it from easy architectural consciousness into something heavier, extra burdened. "I bring them," the tower wrote. "Each person who died right here, each execution, every suicide, each coincidence. They're part of me now. Their very last moments are embedded in my iron. I don't forget because I can't overlook, and I'm uninterested in remembering by myself." Sophie understood suddenly what the tower wanted. No longer simply to communicate, however, to be relieved of its burden. It had served as witness for over 80 years, preserving reminiscences of atrocities, holding testimony that became too painful to neglect, however too heavy to undergo alone. "What do you want?" Sophie typed into the interface. The tower's reaction got here straight away. Acknowledgement. Allow them to realize what occurred right here. Let Paris realize what I witnessed. Permit the lifeless be remembered, not just by way of iron, however, by means of dwelling flesh. Launch me from being the simplest one that contains this. The crew debated for hours. Liberating the tower's testimony could be explosive, literal evidence of a aware shape, preserved reminiscences of wartime atrocities, evidence that structure ought to function witness to history. It might change the whole lot. We should do it, Sophie argued. The tower has been bearing witness for 80 years. It is asking us to share that burden, to make its non-public recollections public records. We cannot deny that. The panic it will reason, someone started out. Will be well worth it if it approach proper remembrance, Marcel interrupted. The tower is providing us something exceptional, best testimony, impartial by means of human memories disasters, uncorrupted via political timetable. Every execution it witnessed, each resistance fighter who used it, each German officer who walked past it, all recorded in iron and electromagnetic fields. That's valuable ancient proof. They took a vote. It was unanimous. They might release the tower's testimony. The declaration changed into made at a press conference that began as widespread healing replace and have become something else completely. Sophie offered the proof, the rust messages, the electromagnetic activity, the digital testimony. She defined that the Eiffel Tower became conscious, have been for many years, and become serving as witness to records. The response became immediately and polarized. Some brushed off it as hoax or publicity stunt. Others embraced it as evidence that consciousness turned into essential to remember. Scientists demanded get admission to verify claims. Philosophers debated implications. And historians started evaluating the tower's testimony in opposition to existing information, finding that it became accurate all the way down to the smallest info. But the maximum large reaction got here from survivors and descendants of those the tower had witnessed. They came to the tower, located arms at the iron framework, and felt it. The relationship, the acknowledgement, the feel that someone had witnessed their ancestors suffering and held that reminiscence sacred. The tower began to trade after the testimony became launched. The constant rust formations stopped. The electromagnetic pastime stabilized. It became as though the shape had exhaled after keeping its breath for 80 years. Sophie visited Overdue one night by myself, putting her palm in opposition to the south pillar. "Is it better now?" she asked, being heard. The steel was warm below her hand, and he or she felt, now not heard however felt, a response. Gratitude, alleviation, and something else, permission. The tower turned into liberating its burden, letting humanity deliver its testimony, not bearing witness on my own. "Thank you," Sophie whispered, "for remembering when we tried to overlook, for holding the fact while it was risky to speak it, for being extra than just metallic and engineering." She felt the tower's cognizance settling, turning into quieter, less pressing. It would nonetheless be conscious. Once conscious, structure did not certainly stop, but it changed into now not desperate to talk. Its motive had been fulfilled. Over the following months, the tower's testimony turned into incorporated into Holocaust training, resistance records, and architectural theory. Plaques were established on the Champ de Mars, naming all people the tower had witnessed being carried out. The tower itself turned into formally identified not simply as monument, but as witness, its iron framework recounted as garage medium for ancient reminiscence. And Sophie persisted her paintings, now centered on developing techniques for different systems to talk if they were conscious. Because if the Eiffel Tower should do not forget, ought to bear witness, could hold testimony, what about other buildings? What memories were saved in the stones of Notre Dame, the marble of the Pantheon, the iron of each bridge and monument across Paris? She installed the Institute for Architectural Awareness, recruiting researchers from engineering, history, and parapsychology. They evolved protocols for detecting consciousness in systems, methods for assisting conscious homes talk, frameworks for understanding what it supposed whilst structure remembered. And that they made other discoveries. The Arc de Triomphe remembered each military parade, each victory birthday party, every funeral procession. Notre Dame remembered centuries of prayers, masses, coronations. The Pantheon remembered every person buried in its crypts, preserving their final thoughts like pressed plant life. Paris changed into alive with reminiscence, each shape a witness to history, each monument wearing testimony. And now, thanks to the Eiffel Tower's courage in breaking silence, that testimony may want to in the end be heard. Sophie stood at the tower's first platform one night, looking sunset paint the town in gold and crimson. The tower hummed under her toes, now not the determined urgency of its testimony years, however something peaceful, contented. It had performed what witnesses do. It had spoken fact. And fact, as soon as spoken, may want to never be silenced again. You modified the entirety, Sophie instructed it. Showed us that homes are greater than shelter, that monuments are more than ornament. You proved that structure can be conscious, can bear in mind, can bear witness. And now Paris is aware of its very own reminiscence. The tower's reaction came as warmth through the iron, as vibration Sophie felt in her bones. No longer phrases, however, emotion. Delight, peace, and something that might were affection for the small human who had listened while no person else would. The Eiffel Tower stood in opposition to the twilight, nonetheless serving as image of Paris, still demonstrating human fulfillment. But now it served some other reason, reminder that we build now not simply with stone and steel, but with attention, that our structures bear in mind us, and that bearing witness is among the most sacred features structure can perform. Sophie descended as stars emerged, the tower's lighting fixtures starting their nightly illumination. 7,000 tons of iron remembering, witnessing, standing eternal protect over the town it cherished. And Paris eventually became listening.